Hello and welcome to Africa Today. I am Esther Mokwariola. It has been so much for a brand of politics exclusive to Kenya, with the rest of Africa wondering when the latest episode of the country's Game of Thrones would come to an end. From the wake of a controversial election to the aftermath of an unprecedented annulment in 2017, Kenya now finds itself in an uncharted waters, home to both a substantial elected president and a non-official alternative president for those who beg to differ. And so we ask, what are your thoughts on political developments in Kenya following the mock inauguration of opposition leader Raila Odinga as the people's president? You can join the conversation and share your thoughts with us on Twitter at TVC News NG. We take a report now, and Africa Today will continue. Welcome on board.
Uphold sovereignty, integrity, and dignity of the people of Kenya.
Kenya's opposition leader Raila Odinga took an unofficial oath to be sworn in as the nation's people's president in the presence of the supporters on Tuesday, January the 30th. The event took place 3 months after he boycotted the presidential election rerun.
That I will preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of Kenya as by law established, and all other laws of the Republic as adopted by the people of Kenya. That I will protect, uphold sovereignty, integrity, and dignity of the people of Kenya. So help me God.
Last year, an initial presidential election held in August, with Kenyatta winning the polls but the Supreme Court annulled it. Odinga boycotted that election over a failure to rebuild the Electoral Commission, and his supporters claimed that the plebiscite had been neither free nor fair. A runoff election was held, and President Uhuru Kenyatta was sworn in for a second term in November, with state institutions reporting to him. During his speech at the swearing-in, Odinga declined to give details of his plans and said they will be disclosed in due course. Meanwhile, authorities in Kenya shut televisions and radio stations on Tuesday as Odinga's supporters watched him take the symbolic oath.
But the good thing is that we have social media, which we're not using. And that is a very big tool of getting information nowadays, because mainstream media has always been compromised.
While his vice president will be sworn in at a later date, Odinga's supporters say he is Kenya's legitimate leader.
Welcome back. President Uhuru Kenyatta returned to Kenya from Addis Ababa hours after the opposition leader Raila Odinga was sworn in as the people's president. While it is politically impossible for any country to have two presidents at the same time, the East African powerhouse literally looks like a smartphone with a dual SIM feature. Joining me in the studio now on Africa Today, I have Okenna Nebedum, lawyer and political analyst based in Lagos. And on Skype, I have Dr. John Mbaku, lecturer at the Webster State University of Utah and non-resident senior fellow Brookings Institute in Washington, D.C. Good to have you both on the program.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, let me begin with you, okay?
Yeah.
Two presidents at the same time. This is more like a hard nut to crack. How can this happen in a country? You know, it's really, really unfathomable, don't you think?
Nothing is impossible in Africa.
Really?
When it comes to power. Africa is one hell of a country where the president, most of the African presidents and the constitution under which they preside over their countries are so powerful. The powers are so enormous. And that is why you can see so much is being put into electioneering campaigns. And not much of the kind of money spent, but also the passion with which people go out there to, get hold onto power. And sometimes, too, the agitation for power are divided amongst and along ethnic lines, regarding regard being had to the constituent tribal elements or tribal entities.
But should this be so? Because you're talking about a president here. So regardless of where you are from, whatever tribe you are representative of the people. So ethnicity shouldn't be a basis when selecting a president, should it?
Sometimes there is dominance of one ethnic entity against the other. But what is playing out in Kenya is, I tend to call it something like the hold on to power by the power situation there is getting elitist. Raila Odinga is more like a person who is the grassroots person. The people whom Kenyans have entrusted power onto are getting more remote. You know, they are not relating with the people, or they are not feeling the dividends of democracy. And that is why you can see them dare the government in power to swear in who they call a people's president, unrecognized by the constitution. But when sometimes people take up different actions against constitutional authorities, you need to look into that. It is an act of frustration. African nation, on the part of the people, it's an act of frustration. Yeah, when they are being suffocated by state entities, you know, when you lay hold onto power like that, you suffocate, like what happened at the government in power had to shut down all communication, all television, on all broadcast agencies, media stations. But thank God for 21st century style of broadcasting. The unofficial broadcasting mediums, the social media, they covered it. That doesn't remove the fact that the people have spoken.
All right, let me quickly come to Dr. John Mbako. Dr. John Mbako, with what Nebedum has just said, do you agree that the people, you know, did this out of frustration on the part of the Jubilee government?
Well, yes. It is true that people in Kenya are very frustrated, not just Jubilee supporters, because even supporters of President Kenyatta are not at the same level in terms of economic development. So there are many people in Kenya who are frustrated with the government. But that said, one of the things that we have to be very careful about is that in a democratic election, somebody is going to win and somebody is going to lose. And one of the important aspects of democracy is that when the elections are over and a winner is declared, the person losing the election should not interfere with the running of the government, because in the end, it's not going to do the country any good. I know that the supporters of Odinga are very, very frustrated. There's no question about it. But having Odinga sway himself in as an alternative government is not going to solve the problem of the frustration of his followers. For one thing, when you have a constitutional issue in any country, there has to be a final authority to determine what the answer to the constitutional issue is. And in most countries, that final authority is the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court of Kenya has already answered that question. Whether the opposition likes the Supreme Court of Kenya or not, in order for the country to move forward, it must accept that decision. And if the opposition believes that the Supreme Court is constituted in a way in which it favors certain groups or the incumbent government, then it can find a way to resolve that question.
So what do you anticipate would happen in the coming weeks now that Raila Odinga has been declared as the president of Kenya, and still the country has Uhuru Kenyatta as its president? What next do you think would likely happen now?
Well, the thing is that constitutionally, Odinga doesn't really matter when it comes to running the country, because he's not the president according to the Constitution. And he said during his inauguration yesterday that he was going to uphold the Constitution of Kenya. If he's going to do that, then he should not have engaged in the activities that he was engaging in, because those activities are extra-constitutional. They are not constitutional at all, not according to the Constitution of Kenya, because the Constitution recognizes only one president, and that is the president that has been declared by the Supreme Court of Kenya as the president. I think that if Odinga and the opposition want to move the country ahead, they should try to find a way to work with the existing government and wait until another opportunity comes for them to try to get into power. Creating an alternative government is only going to create chaos and produce expectations in the opposition that cannot be met within the existing system that they have in Kenya. I think that going forward, the most important thing to do is for the government not to become violent and try to suppress the opposition. It should allow the opposition to express its frustration peacefully, and the security forces should not try to beat the opposition into submission, because that would only create additional problems.
Indeed, and I need to hold your thought now. We need to go on a very quick break. You're watching Africa Today, and we've been looking at political developments in Kenya following the mock inauguration of opposition leader Raila Odinga as the people's president. Welcome back. In December, Githu Muigai, Kenya's Attorney General, had warned that Raila Odinga's alternative swearing-in ceremony would amount to treason. Now, the government has now outlawed the opposition's national resistance movement, and according to Kenyan law, being a member of an organized criminal group can lead to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 10 years, a fine of more than $5,000 or both. Now, okay, looking at this situation now, how do you think the Jubilee government can handle this matter without allowing it to escalate into perhaps violence?
A resort to the judiciary. I see that as the only leeway, because the government in power led by Uhuru Kenyatta wouldn't capitulate into, do I call it a mushroom swearing in? Neither would the other young man, Odinga, who has boxed himself to a corner. He has gotten to the extreme. You know, if anything happens to him now, he's at the precipice, either a do or die affair. But giving him that leeway of getting into the courts may not really be easy if the state apparatus are not being ignited, one, against the law of treason, and two, to approach their Supreme Court for interpretation of a situation like this. What are the legal questions to be raised? Transparency in an electoral process. I think the point he canvassed in that election petition 1, there was the election petition 4 that eventually was also decided by their Supreme Court. In that particular judgment, I read through it, and I saw very cogent point. It's an ideology about transparency in an election. And you see, corruption happens in an election when an end is already determined. You have an end in mind, and you situate state apparatus to act in line in order to, cascade into that ultimate outcome. That was what Raila Odinga was actually agitating against, and which he didn't seem to see or get comfortable about those points being made, and he withdrew from participating in that election. And then the result now, once you don't participate in an election, then the result, you can't come to complain either. Volunty non fit injuria. You voluntarily withdrew from participating, and the outcome came against you. You cannot complain against the election right now. So the leeway open to him is to risk being charged for treason. And in that trial for treason, and I hope it will be very transparent, he can now begin to canvass his votes. We have a precedent sometime in April 1964.
Canvass votes from the people?
Not canvassing votes, canvass your ideology.
Okay.
In Southern Africa, sometime under, particularly the country of South Africa, went through stuff under the late Nelson Mandela. And in April 1964, during the Revonia trial, he was put in the dock, and charges were being read against him for treason. And he opened his mouth and said that it is the government which ought to be in the dock, and is pleading not guilty, because it is the government that is actually guilty for treason, because they are actually raising up awareness and getting people to be defiant against unjust laws. Now, if that opportunity is provided for Odinga, he can use the platform of the court and gather some notable lawyers and then raise constitutional questions that should be decided. And the issue of, yes, the issue of treason may be, it is for the state apparatus to prove treason against him. And it is for him to disprove that treason by the points he's going to be canvassing. And that will you know, raise another form of jurisprudence or something for Africa to learn from.
Or even more drama.
Yeah, drama, as against violence.
Indeed. Now, let's look at the situation of the media shutdown. Dr. Mbaku, let's look at the situation of where some media stations were shut down in Kenya. This situation caused a lot of reactions, especially in the journalistic circles here, where 3 stations, mostly major stations in Kenya, were not allowed to, you know, show the inauguration of Raila Odinga because, well, they say it's more of a breach of security there. But what's your reaction to the way it was handled by the government in Kenya?
I think the government made a terrible mistake. What the government should have done was to allow no coverage. The government should have actually allowed complete coverage by television stations in Kenya so that people could understand what was going on. When you, as a country, prevent people from finding out what is going on, then people are forced to get the information secondhand from someone else. And that is the opportunity that is open for conspiracy theories to come into play. Because what is happening in Kenya right now, I just got off the phone with somebody there, is that because the government did not allow the coverage, many people in Kenya who were not in Nairobi have no idea what was going on during the process. And so many of them are getting their information from second-hand information. And if you are getting it from the opposition, you are likely to get a distorted view. And if you're getting it from members of the supporters of the government, you're also going to get a distorted view. And so I think that it's a mistake for government anyway, including that in Kenya, to prevent people from having access to important information that can allow them to judge what is happening on their own. As a government, you have to trust the people and allow them to consume information so that they can figure out for themselves what is going on in the country. Quite often in Africa, we think that if people don't have PhDs, then they cannot interpret what is going on around them. And so they try to prevent newspapers and TV stations from covering news. That is a terrible mistake. And I think that is one of the most important mistakes that the Kenyan government made in this instance.
How do you think the government can wriggle out of this one, knowing that it's more of a bad press for the government?
Well, I think that if you are a government, you shouldn't be interested being in government. It's not about a popularity contest. You're not conducting a beauty contest where you want everybody to like you. If there is information that will reflect negatively on the government, the best thing for you to do is to allow people to see it, because transparency, as the professor said, transparency is very important in any government. You shouldn't selectively allow people to have government information. You should only prevent people from having information if it has some very important security aspects, or if the information is going to compromise the private lives of individuals. Otherwise, no matter whether the information will reflect poorly on the government or not, you should allow people to have access to that information. Because if you don't do that, then when it comes time for you to promote a program, many of your citizens are not going to believe you when you tell them about something. I have been to countries where the government was trying to promote information on HIV prevention, and people simply didn't believe the government because the government had lied so many times before, and so it became very difficult for the government to promote those public policies. So transparency and truth by the government is very important. One more thing that I'd like for us to look at here is that going forward, I think one of the most important things that the government of Kenya can do right now going forward is to try to find ways to have a national dialogue on what happened in the country, or what has happened in the country since August. It's important that the government start talking not just to the leaders, not just to Odinga, but to ordinary people in Kenya who are frustrated with the way the government and governance is going on in the country.
So, but the question of national dialogue here, Dr. Mbaku, I'm sorry for interrupting. The question of national dialogue, are you looking at a government of national unity in this case?
There was there were some ideas after the October elections, after Mr. Kenyatta was declared president, that Mr. Kenyatta was going to form a government of national unity. But there were rumors in Kenya that members of the opposition had indicated that they were not going to participate in such a government because they believed that they had won the elections, and that participating in such a national government of unity would mean that they were accepting President Kenyatta as president. But I think the idea of a government of national unity is very important because it would provide a platform for the kind of dialogue that Kenya needs to engage in order to move ahead.
All right. All right. Let's quickly come to you now, Dr. Okenna. If this is the situation in Kenya, what then does it mean for the regional bloc? I mean, East African region. Seeing that Kenya represents, a large percentage of that regional bloc in Africa.
Yeah, Kenya can never be ignored economically. It is the economic powerhouse of Eastern Africa. And I very much feel concerned about what is happening, though political now. And, policies in governance affect economic wealth of a nation. I hope they manage it very well. Like you rightly said, they are not in a contest, beauty contest or popularity contest. But I can tell African countries and African leaders, you don't engage in sit-tight governance when you get unpopular. Government is not by force. It is not by force of,
exerting authority.
Exerting yourself from the people when they have, see, at a point when the electorate, in defiance of constitutional authority, want to stake their lives to make protests against the powers that be, you should read the handwritings on the wall that it is a rejection of that administration. And I beg the government there, if your people have rejected you, wholeheartedly resign and let the constitutional authorities conduct an election within the time. It is not about Odinga. It's not about Uhuru. It's about a system of governance that has been rejected. Within the last 5 years they've been in power, they must have been assessed. And if the process that brought you into power is being flawed, then it is corrupt. It is tainted with some, you see, when in computer devices, when they say your system is corrupted, you go and disinfect it. You go and format. Let the government go back to
okay, so moving forward, what's the way out of this logjam in Kenya?
One, the national dialogue is an option. And if he wants to heat up the polity and then charge him for treason, that would be a very dangerous, I believe that should be a remote option. But government of national unity has been rejected. So let there be a national dialogue, inter-party, beyond party. Let the constitutional authorities, let them do a whole conference on it and then raise an independent from the civil society organization. They are the ones that even took the matter to court, showing you that, you see, governance is about social contract theory. And the principles of democracy established on the principle of representative government. We cannot all be there, but we can always have periodic elections for those in executive to execute, those in the legislature to make laws for us. But this time, when through constitutional means those who elected are not doing fine, the people take themselves to the street, like what is happening, what had just happened with Raila Odinga.
Which wasn't really a good story after all.
It's not a good theory. When it happens like that, what you do is go back to dialogue and then let the people feel that they are being heard. Empathize with them, and then let solution will come out.
And we really hope for solutions come out quickly.
And let Nigeria also export some kind of good examples. We had a president who willingly handed over power. Let him be deployed by the African Union to intervene in that matter.
All right, at that point, let's thank you very much, Okenna Nebedum, lawyer and political analyst, for your contributions on the show. And as well, Dr. John Mbaku, we appreciate your analysis as well on the program.
Thank you. Thank you.
At a point in time when the noise of politics is on the verge of drowning out the voice of reason, Kenya stands the risk of losing much of what it has gained in the last 10 years in a country that has become increasingly polarized along ethnic lines. Perhaps a wake-up call for African leaders to put national agenda above personal interest and ensure that democratic values and the rule of law are upheld for the benefit of the people. Well, that is our package for today, but don't forget to join the conversation as usual on Twitter at TVC News NG and follow me for updates around Africa at Esther TVC News. On to the next one, I am Esther Mokpariola, and always remember, this is Africa. Bye for now.